welcome back to the Tech Talks Daily podcast. Now, as regular listeners will know, I always say technology works best when it brings people together. So when I learned that the GSMA is a global organisation that's unifying the mobile ecosystem to help discover, develop and deliver innovation that unlocks the full power of connectivity so that people, industry and society can thrive, I felt compelled to find out more. Because the GSMA ultimately represent mobile operators and organisations across the entire mobile ecosystem and adjacent industries. So after hearing more about 5G and 5G-Advanced and the convergence of 5G and IoT, I invited Barbara Pareglio onto the podcast to find out more. And she is the Executive Director for Advanced Air Mobility and IoT Technical Director at GSMA. So buckle up and hold on tight, because I'm going to beam your ears all the way to Las Vegas, where Barbara has taken a step away from the show floor at NWC to join me on the podcast today and talk about advancing the 5G era benefits and the opportunities of 5G Advanced. So a massive warm welcome to the show, Barbara. Can you tell the listeners a little about who you are and what you do?
Sure. So my name is Barbara Pareglio. I'm working in a technology group within the GSMA. And my, let's say, area of interest at the moment, the major area of interest, is what we call advanced air mobility. So I always work in the IoT, the Internet of Things, but lately I looked at how we can, extend the possibility of use the networks for services that are drones, or in the future, the what we call the uncrewed type of vehicles in the air. So that's my area of, at the moment, of focus, but obviously also look at different aspects of the network, how we can use, the features of the network for applications. In general speaking, it could be IoT applications in my area of specialty, so to say.
Love that. And what I'd love to do as well is take you back in time for a moment before drones and even before when IoT was even a thing. So can you remember passion for tech came from, or just a moment that put you on this path that you're on today?
So I actually didn't start my path on the technology. And probably, at my time, most of the people says, no, there's no jobs in technology. You have to go work in the bank. So, take that path, the business. I started that path, but quickly I decided, this path is probably not for me. And I always liked to build things. As my father, I always liked to fix things or build things. So I was used to see my father help me also in a garage doing stuff. And I thought, maybe I prefer to actually look at something else. So I started then to deviate from the path that I originally took, and I decided to go more in technology. So I do, as I said, I did like more the solving problems, and physical, problems, because obviously you can always solve problems everywhere. But so that's why it took me more down that path. Then I decided to go for engineering, and from there, then again refining exactly where. And I did like telecommunication at the time. It was interesting. I still remember my uncle's first phone is still a mobile phone. It was like 18 kilos, the big box with a battery. So I thought, all this stuff. Things have changed.
That's the reason I was going to say that was the reason I always ask this question to begin with, because everyone I speak with on here, very few people set out for a career in technology, but they're armed with a curious mind and wanting to solve problems, wanting to change the world, and don't fit in the box of, like you say, banking or an industry outside of tech, and they just naturally get drawn to it throughout their career. And of course, your path led you to GSMA, and I'm conscious we will have people hearing about GSMA for the very first time. So could you tell me a little bit more about the company and the problems that it solves?
Yeah, so GSMA is a non-profit association that is being set off to, I'd say, the time when we had 2G. So as I mentioned before, the first mobile phones, it was like the 1G type of phones. And then quickly the industry realized that they need to harmonize, they need to be able to cross border and still have possible to communicate. So when the era of 2G came along, then they understood that they need like a roaming. So they need interoperability. They need to have one standard. So in order to set up the framework for roaming, GSMA was created at that time. So our primary goal at that time was to help the industry, the mobile operator, to set the framework for roaming and have it, a third party with no interest, so to say, to set up this roaming framework. And then from there, we evolve. So we have different type of area that we look. We have the technologies I mentioned. So we look at how make sure that we continue to have interoperability throughout, the generations. And then, but we also have the advocacy part. So we have a lot of different parts. Like spectrum is one of the prime area for us where we work and understand what is the needs of the industry. So GSMA basically is, like any association, is representing the telco industry, and primarily the mobile operator. So we do set work in different areas for that. And in technology, as I mentioned, we look at how we do work together for IoT, or we work in, for example, the fintech. So we have different areas that we're looking at.
And we will have people listening all over the world. So on behalf of everyone listening, who and how can people join the GSMA's activities? Is there a certain number of people or audiences that you're looking for?
But yeah, to be fair, as I said, the core majority of our members, so we are a membership-led organization. So in order to be a member of GSMA, you need to, subscribe to be a member. But our core group is obviously the mobile operator in the world. And then we have all the, let's say, the telco suppliers, the vendors, the chip, the module, the software provider, all these, let's say, any company that does in some way provide services to the telecommunication ecosystem can be a member. We recently also expand more because, the shift of the traditional telecommunication to actually serve the consumers, so make calls, is being moving more to industries, more business-related type of usage. So we extend to organizations that it could be like an industrial or car manufacturers. They become an important stakeholders in this discussion. So we have now more organizations that are a little bit, I would say, outside of the traditional telecommunication ecosystem. But that's where the 5G or already on the 4G, you start seeing this shift where there is an interest of utilizing mobile networks. Hence, the ecosystem is expanding naturally. So we're looking at anyone that is utilizing services from the mobile operator, and they want to also influence, have a discussion on the same table. They can join the GSMA.
Fantastic. And one of the reasons I was excited to get you on the podcast today is there's so much talk and hype around 5G, but I want to explore beyond that. So to set the scene for today's conversation, can you tell me a little bit more about what 5G-Advanced is and why it's so important?
Yeah, so to look at back at as a user, most of the people, they just see, the connectivity. And they have an icon on the phone that says you have 3G, you have 4G, or you have 5G. So every generation historically is a life cycle of about 10 years. So if the 2G, the 3G, and the 4G. In these 10 years, we divide it in two phases most of the time. So we say the first phase is the initial phase, so where you develop the actual framework, the footprint of the generation. And the second phase is the phase where you refine it. So the 5G is the first half of this 10-year cycle, so to say. And this primarily, you would say 5G has been changing a lot compared to the 4G. So we set up all the basic framework and the most important features, but the features that you would see that are mainly deployed are to target the primary customer of the MNO, so the consumer. So all the services to improve the capacity, the speed for the experience of the consumers. The second half, the 5G Advanced, is actually where you still continue to refine that, but it's also where you expand the services and you refine it for the business aspects, I would say, more looking at the industries, the different type of industry. It could be automotive, it could be aviation, industrial. That is the 5G Advanced is actually focusing more on that aspect. So it's reaching out to, I would say, the rest of the opportunity beyond the traditional consumer. So that's why it's very important 5G Advanced, because without that, it means that the industry will not have maybe the appropriate set of features that they would like to use. That's why we're really looking at now to start thinking together what exactly is, to maintain, as I said before, this interoperability as a GSMA. We need to look at what the standard is doing, make sure that there's also the right directions on the standard, that it makes sense, and also to look at how we take this feature and how they can be utilized for the users, or for the business type of users. So that is the time now that we look at this path and we start having a conversation and setting, let's say, the framework.
And I think the success of any new technology or emerging technology is always determined by the adoption by businesses, by users. So can you expand on how at the GSMA, how you help to spread knowledge and accelerate the adoption of 5G Advanced, for example?
Yeah, we do a lot of activity to, outreach. We have communities, for example. So these communities, there are communities where they look at different areas. As I mentioned before, could be fintech, the identity, the Internet of Things, the mobility aspects, whether it could be on the ground or in the air, the manufacturing, or the, let's say, industrial aspect. So we have actually forum or community where we have conversation with the telco ecosystem, but also with the, let's say, the other ecosystem. It could be industry, it could be logistic, it could be, the automotive, or it could be the fintechs or the finance aspect. So these are communities where we have this conversation, where we exchange knowledge. So we learn from the other ecosystem what they need, what are the boundaries, because also this ecosystem have a regulatory framework where they need to, follow. And it's quite different than our regulatory framework in telecommunication. So we have all these communities where we come together, we share experience, but we also, let's say, exchange the capabilities, we explain how the network works, what you can do. And then we also have, we try to publish white papers. It helps to get at least a grasp of what we're talking about. We have webinars. We have, obviously, our dual event, Mobile World Congress, where we do in different parts of the world. That's where we have, the majority of the conversation. You can see exactly what the MNOs and the industries is driving, what is happening. So these are all areas where, the GSMA is providing example of how to reach and how to understand and accelerate also the deployment of the 5G.
And I appreciate you're probably limited to what you can share with me today, but is there anything you can expand on any of the activities GSMA are doing in relation to the evolution of 5G?
No, so we have a group. So we have several groups within the GSMA. We have the long-standing groups, which is basically the work on maintaining, as I mentioned before, the interoperability, making sure that all the new features of the networks are appropriately given guidance to MNOs how to use it. This is what we call our working group. So we have working groups working on network. We have a working group that look at wholesale agreement, the roaming. We have all these different working group. Particularly in the 5G Advanced, we have a community that look at the 5G era and look at different aspects of what we can do. And we also have a 5G, it's called 5G Transformation Hub, is where we provide examples of use cases or case study that are already there and done, try to take the learning, share it with the rest, see how it worked in a certain area, so that at least give also guidance to the rest to see how you can make a similar setup or learning. And as I mentioned, then we have also a group of operators only that look at their primary interest or what are the features that for them make sense. In general, we have a community, let's say, that anyone is welcome to contact us for this community. And we worked together to tackle some of the issues or some of the challenges that they face and try to come up with guidance, what the best way to approach it. So that once we learn, the hard way, the other one can at least utilize the learnings without going through the same pain. But yeah, we have in the website, we have a different area that is looking at 5G where anyone can have a look what is the primary interest. But anyone, as I said, is interested in IoT, we have a group doing that. FinTech, we have a group. The transformation industry, we have also that community that is looking at aspects. And also primarily on the network, looking at different, it could be edge computing or telco edge cloud, or it could be the millimeter wave. So we have a lot of different aspects that we look at the 5G, let's say, family, and we try to work together.
And I was recently looking at the tech conference IFA in Berlin, where they got all the latest new smart home products and gadgets and gizmos. But of course, the one thing that stood out was the conflict almost with all the latest technology requiring energy and people to have the affordability to buy these gadgets, and at a time where we're talking about carbon footprints. So can you tell me more about building the 5G Advanced blueprint for corporate social responsibility and sustainability too? Because these are big topics right now in the tech industry, aren't they?
Absolutely, they're a big topic, but also, it's very close to the heart of the mobile operators. So they also pay the bill, right? So, so that is running a network is expensive. It's expensive not in the sense of also expensive as money cost, but is expensive in mean of resources. So, but that's why the 5G, you can say that 5G and the 5G Advanced particularly is where we set the footprint for a generation which is very focused on power saving. We never had to worry until before, so to say, but then it's the focus has shifted. So from the 5G, and particularly as I mentioned, the 5G Advanced, every single feature that you actually look at and try to develop is not only looked from the perspective of the technology and the performances, but one of the key criteria is also the performances as power consumption. To be mindful, to have that as a forefront of the design for power consumption. That's the shift that you will see in the 5G and 5G Advanced. Because there is absolutely, as you mentioned, there is a need to make sure that the power, the energy is used at the minimum needed and only when it's needed. Instead of before, you just, it's okay, it's always on. So we are used to have a service and the network and also your phone is always on and is always consuming. So now it's shifting and we try to make sure that you actually a bit more concerned on how you utilize the energy. And it starts from the devices. So we did a lot of work, particularly for IoT, because IoT is a lot of devices will not have, power, will run on battery. And the battery is also used to actually run the actual device. So you have to be very concerned of how much of that power you use for the communication parts. So that is where the whole power efficiency started a few years back. And then from there, moved to the network. And also now the network itself is actually looking at how to reduce the consumption. An example, you can, instead of having your always network on and to the full extent of the capability, but if you only have at night much less traffic, you also can, utilize less energy. So there's a lot of things that now they do, and also try to utilize AI and machine learning to help them to, predict and use at best the resources without, always consume the maximum, because you have to make sure that you serve your customer. So, it's like you serve and then you are looking at the peak, but while you can actually look at the distribution and make sure that you are providing energy for fitting the purposes of the distribution at the time. So that's is a very close to the heart of the MNOs, as I mentioned, and particularly in these days where the energy cost is going up, the interest is going up. So they're really, really looking also from the standardization point of view. So the work that they do in InterGPP, it's really keen to look at every single feature to make sure that they're also efficient from a power perspective.
And of course, at the moment, it does feel like there's a lot of uncertainty in the world. And as someone that's right in the heart of this space, if we were to look towards the future, what kind of opportunities in this space particularly excite you? To me, as I mentioned before, we use a long time to have the services of telecommunication we experience, all of us as a consumer. But the opportunity beyond that, I think it's huge, and it's, as a clinician, it's easy to get maybe into excited because you can jump on all these different areas and look at how you can actually help to fix a problem. And sometimes, as I said, if you had something without connectivity at all, you would continue to fix it in a certain way or having, a process that you use. But having, almost real-time data, it allows you to react very quickly and adapt very quickly. And the efficiency of the service or whatever you do, it's improving. So it's quite fascinating, at least from a technician point of view, to see how you can help and look at the different problems and see how you can provide something useful. So that's it is quite fascinating for me. That's why I jump in the area of drones and the aviation. I never, worked in aviation, so I don't know anything of aviation. But it's quite nice to see how they work, how they think, and how you can help them to do things in a different way that could help them. But it's a long process, so it's a two-way learning, and getting in the mind of an industry is also difficult. You need to learn what they're doing, how they're doing it, why they do it like that. That's the nice part, or try to look at the problems, look at it in different ways, and see if you can bring the learning on a different market onto the new ones. I love that. And I can't thank you enough for coming on here and sharing your insights. But before I do let you go, I'm going to ask you to share one other thing with everyone listening, and that's leave us with either a book that has inspired you that we can add to our Amazon wish list, or a song that maybe inspired you that we can add to our Spotify playlist. So what are you going to leave everyone listening with today? I'm
probably going to choose a song. I mean, there's so many songs that I love, and it's very dependent on my mood, I would say. But at the moment, maybe I would say I go a little bit old-fashioned. I like a lot Heroes from David Bowie. It's a very short song, but it's very nice. And, sometimes you have to tell yourself, I'm going to be a hero for a day. Yeah. So it's a really nice song. So that's the one for today, I would say.
That's an oldie but a goodie, one of my favourites. I will get that added to our Spotify playlist. So much I've loved chatting with you today about why 5G-Advanced is important, and the great work that you're doing there at GSMA. I've learned so much. I hope everyone listening has too. But before I let you go, for anyone listening just wanting to find out more information about GSMA, how they can get involved, maybe subscribe, be a member, or just find out more information about how they can get involved, what's the best starting point for everything?
I would say the best point is our website. So it's very easy. It's www.gsma.com. And in there's a lot of activity. There is also, you can look at a different areas. So there's a lot of documentation, papers that you can read, case study, videos, interviews, you can start from there. And you can always contact in the page. There is also an email where you can contact us if you're interested to learn more, or if you want to know how to join. So you can always email and you will get to the appropriate person within the GSMA that will help you through getting more information. I would say I would start with that.
Well, I'll add that link to the show notes and the blog post that will accompany this episode so people can find you nice and easily. But more than anything, just thanks again for sharing your great story, the work that you're doing, and even leaving us with a great tune too. So thanks again, Barbara.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here. Thank you. Bye.
It was great hearing more about 5G and 5G-Advanced, and also how the GSMA Internet of Things is helping operators to fully realise the opportunity in IoT. and also how operators must deliver secure IoT networks as well as scalable value-added data services for the world's industry and machines, all beyond connectivity. So many big talking points there, and I'd love to hear if anything resonated with you, or if you've got any stories that you'd like to share, or insights, or expertise, whatever it is. Simply email me, techblogwriter@outlook.com. You can find me on Twitter, LinkedIn, Instagram, even TikTok at Neil C. Hughes, and my website is techblogwriter.co.uk if you want to browse through 2,100 other podcast interviews or learn more how you can work with me. But that's it for today's podcast, so a big thank you for listening today. I cordially invite you to join me again tomorrow where we'll do it all again. But until next time, don't be a stranger.